is a color model intended for use with on-screen viewing of artwork, as well as outputting artwork to, say, a printer, being RGB and CMYK. There are also two different ways of looking at the resolution of your artwork. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is PPI. And as you can see here on screen, PPI means pixels per inch. PPI is the way the resolution of our artwork is calculated for displaying on a computer monitor. Remember, our computer monitors use pixels to display images. Now, the other method of counting the resolution of our artwork is going to be called DPI, dots per inch. This is a resolution or a way of calculating resolution that is specific to outputting your artwork on a print device, say maybe an inkjet printer or even a commercial offset printing press. So when calculating these two different resolutions, they're done a little bit differently, and I've got this kind of laid out in this image to kind of show you the difference between the two. So when we look at pixels in a square inch here, you can see that the pixels are arranged and they're butted right up against each other. Each pixel is a little different color, and we learned in the last lesson that that's a result of combining the red, green, and blue lights in your monitor to make these different colors. So if we were to zoom in really closely here on this particular image, you're going to see exactly what I saw over there to the right, or what I laid out over to the right. You can see each one of these pixels, and because I have the pixel grid visible, we can come in and turn that on and off by going to View and Show Pixel Grid. Because I have that pixel grid visible, I can see where each one of those pixels is in the image and how the color is calculated for that pixel. So with this particular file, I've got this set up with 300 pixels in a square inch, or 300 PPI. Now let's go ahead and pan down here and look at DPI just for a moment. Now again, we're kind of faking DPI on this monitor, but DPI works a little bit differently than PPI. Whereas with PPI, the pixels were butted right up against each other, you can see here with DPI, we have space between each of the dots. So when a printer prints an image on a piece of paper, it sprays these small dot patterns onto the paper, and it uses those cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks, assuming it's a process print job. Again, we're going to talk about process printing here in just a couple lessons, but and you can kind of see, again, an example here. So there is white in between each of these dots. So if we had our resolution for this file set at 300 pixels per inch, that's not going to equate exactly to 300 dots per inch when the file goes over to the print press. Now, that's because, remember, we've got space between the dots here. So what you should know is it's approximately a 2-to-1 ratio when it goes pixels to dots. So thinking about a 300 pixels per inch file here in Photoshop, that's going to translate to roughly 150 DPI, dots per inch, when it goes over to the print press. Now, 150 dots per inch is typically accepted as a standard for printing photographic quality images on an offset printing press. Now, typically that number is between 133 and 150 DPI, but I want to take just a moment to discuss another term that you may hear if you're dealing with an offset printer, and maybe they're pre-press person, the person that takes your files and prepares them and gets them ready for print. You may hear the term LPI, which stands for lines per inch. So we looked here at DPI. Lines per inch simply means that there would be, let's say it's 150 lines per inch. We would have 150 rows, each with 150 dots. So it's sort of similar to DPI, but again, you probably won't hear this referred to outside of maybe an offset printer or someone in the printing industry. Now, how does this relate to you, the designer? Well, if we know that we need 150 dots per inch on an image that we're printing, then and we also know that there's a 2-to-1 ratio, then we know that we need 300 pixels per inch for that same image here in Photoshop. Let me just jump over here to this same fireworks image that we looked at in the previous lesson. And let's just say for a moment that we're wanting to print this on a commercial printing press. Well, I'm going to jump up here to Image and go to Image Size. And here we can see the specifications for this particular image file. Now this is a raw file right off of a camera, and you can see here that we have a width of this image of over 5,100 pixels wide and a height of over 3,400 pixels high. Now when it comes to the current printing size, the physical size of this file, if it was printed on a piece of paper, you can see that right here. We've got 72 inches by 48 inches, which is extremely large, very, very large. Now, there's a problem. Remember, we talked about needing 150 DPI, which we know is 300 PPI, and right now the resolution of this image is only 72 PPI. So, in Photoshop here, we can actually adjust that. Now, there's a couple of things you want to pay attention to here. If we want to just rearrange these pixels that we looked at up above, all we need to do is come down and uncheck this Resample Image checkbox. Notice that those pixel dimensions get locked in, and now we could come in here and say change our resolution to 300 pixels per inch. Now notice how that changes the height and width above. Not nearly as large of a file now. We've got roughly an 11-inch by 17-inch file here. Now we can safely make this change here inside of Photoshop without damaging our photo at all. We're simply taking the pixels in this image and shuffling them around, condensing more of them into an inch. All those pixels are still there. You can see here the total pixel on the dimensions above haven't changed. So this is known as resizing an image. We've resized this image so that it is of a print resolution. So now if we wanted to, we could hit OK on this and maybe save a copy of this file and then send that over to our printer. Now, there is another technique that's known as resampling, and we unchecked that box before. Now, what resampling does is it's going to either take pixels out of this image or it's going to try and add pixels to the image. Let me show you what happens here. I'm going to cancel this out and let me just hit Control-Alt-I to bring that back up. And we could always simply hold down the Alt button and just click the Reset button there if we really wanted to. But notice here that with my Resample box checked down here, now when I come in here and change the resolution to 300, look what happens to the total pixels up here up above. We've actually increased the number of pixels in this image by quite a lot. In fact, you can see the old size of this file was about 51 megs, and now we're looking at just under a gigabyte in size for this one file because we've added that many pixels to it. Now, where does Photoshop get these pixels from? Well, Photoshop is a very intelligent program. In fact, it can examine this image and make up these pixels to the best of its ability. Now, whenever you're trying to add this many pixels to an image, Photoshop's going to fall short and it's not going to do a great job at making a nice, crisp image. But it uses methods known as interpolation to actually create or even remove these pixels from the image. And you can see down here, in this little drop down, it says bicubic automatic. This is actually something that's new in Photoshop CS6, allowing Photoshop to automatically choose which method of interpolation is best for whether you're going up or whether you're going down in size. In this case, we went up. We could drop this down and choose any one of these options here, but typically what's best is going to be just to leave that on bicubic automatic. Now, I mentioned going up and down in size here. Now, adding that many pixels to it, obviously we are going up, so this would be referred to as upsampling our image. Now, let me just go ahead and reset this. I'll hold Alt and hit the Reset button. And I want you to recall, when we resized this image earlier to 300 pixels per inch, remember, we had approximately a 17-inch by 11-inch sized canvas. Well, I don't want that big of a canvas. Let's say we wanted to print this in a 5 by 7 format, 5 inches by 7 inches. So what we could do is we could come in here and change our PPI, our resolution, to 300, come in and specify we want a height of 5 inches, and you'll notice here that it's allowing me to change the height and width values separately. This is kind of dangerous because we can actually end up distorting our image. So it's probably a good idea to constrain the proportions of the image. And at this point, if we come in, you'll notice here we get these little brackets next to both the height and the width, as well as the pixel dimensions above. Let me come in and specify 300 pixels here, and now for the height, let me just specify 5 inches. And you can see here it automatically adjusts the width based on those constrained proportions. So now what we've done here, you'll see here up above, we used to have a 51 meg file. And now we have downsampled this file to 9.66 megabytes. So now we are downsampling. Now, in this case, we are removing pixels from the image, lowering its resolution, so we can print it in this smaller format. All right, great. So that's the difference between upsampling and downsampling an image here in Photoshop. Now, we've also learned about resizing an image, basically just taking and rearranging the pixels so that we can print at a higher resolution. Now, obviously, you'll want to make sure with your printer, with your pre-press contact at your printer, what resolution your images need to be set at. Again, 300 PPI most of the time will work, but there are cases where there is technology out there that will allow your printer to print at even a higher resolution than 300 PPI. And you may need to increase that resolution, and 300 PPI, there's cases for example, with things like newspaper, where even 300 PPI is too high for newsprint. Newsprint's going to print at usually about 85 dots per inch. So again, PPI and DPI are two different ways of measuring the resolution of our artwork. We need to understand that PPI refers to the resolution as it's measured for our screens. DPI is the resolution measured for the printing device. Okay.